Hi everyone, welcome to another spooky episode of Divided Films, the haunted podcast where we talk about divided films, movies that audiences and critics do not agree on. With me as always is my evil co-host Keith.
Hello.
And we
I
that was pretty spooky. It'll give me nightmares. And coming back to the podcast is another ghoulish guest of ours, Adam Volerich. Welcome back.
Boo.
Adam, I asked you not to scare me, and here you are.
I apologize. It's just
like
in
the
my
opening
nature.
of a Simpson Halloween episode.
I know. I feel like we're all channeling the Crypt Keeper today.
Oh man, that's like my hero right there. So it is. It's been October, and we've been going through some spooky movies that are divided, and we're going to finish off our little run here with the 2006 horror comedy movie Slither, directed by James Gunn and starring Elizabeth Banks. This movie falls into the category of having a positive score from critics and a mixed score from audiences. On Rotten Tomatoes, 87% of critics approved and only 63% of audience approved. And the critics' consensus: a slimy B-movie homage oozing with affection for low-budget horror films, Slither is creepy and funny if you've got the stomach for it. I would say I have the stomach for it, but I can understand if other people don't. This movie definitely is doubling down on kind of like the gross factor there, but I don't mind. It's done in like kind of an affectionate way, if that's possible. But I remember seeing this movie maybe like a couple years after it had come out. I caught it on TV and I had a fun time watching it, but I didn't really know anyone else who had seen it at the time. But what about you guys? Were you aware of this one when it initially was released, or did it take you some time to find out about it? Start with Adam.
I believe I saw this film in a movie theater. I think, if I remember correctly, I saw the trailer on TV, and I was like, well, I have to see that. That's exactly my shit. I must check it out. It's funny, when you said that you were thinking about covering this film, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, it makes sense that this would be divided, and I didn't look up in which way it was divided, because I could have seen it go either way. I could have either seen critics being like, this is fucking trash and I hate it, and audiences being like, this is, hilarious and dark and gross and I love it. I wasn't really expecting it to go the other way, but I'm kind of glad that it did, because I don't know. I mean, I wish it had made more money when it came out and Gunn had gotten to do more of this kind of thing. But at the same time, I do like the idea that critics were actually on the pulse and audiences caught up later.
Yeah, it has something that I think critics actually really like when it taps into the older tradition of B horror films, creature features in a very deliberate way. So I think that's something critics like, that there's some very like deliberate choices being made that are...
Right. It's all very intelligently done. Like it's all deliberate's like the perfect word for it.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas maybe like I feel like this is maybe not what was in fashion at the time with horror movies. So maybe that's why it didn't make as much money as I wish it did, and why audiences weren't fully on board with it. But what about you, Keith? What was your history with this one?
I remember I didn't see it in the theaters, but I remember on demanding this. I think late at night I'm putting it on demand. This tickled my fancy. I think I saw the trailer going, I think I might dig this. I kind of did. I don't think Elizabeth Banks was a star yet. I didn't watch Firefly at the time, so I really kind of had no idea who Michael Rooker was. So like the trailer I think sold me, but I remember on demanding this and enjoying this, and by the time I got to college, this was a way to kind of connect with some film, like, hey, did you see Slither? This is like I know everyone's not going to like this movie, but there are certain, if you like Tremors or Evil Dead or any kind of horror comedy or The Blob, the remake of The Blob, like old school homage to B movies, this goes well in that camp.
Well, horror comedy is, I think, a genre that we all like, But I feel
Yeah.
like that's something that not all audiences are into because it's like kind of counterintuitive to put those two things together. It's a more niche subgenre.
It's interesting that you say that because I think that horror and comedy are the only two genres that require a physical reaction from the audience to know that they're functioning, right? So horror, it makes you frightened. You tense up, you scream, you do all of those things. Comedy, it makes you laugh, you chuckle, you do the big belly laugh if it's really working. And bad horror often leads to comedy in the sense that you are laughing at the film. And bad comedy often leads to horror in the sense that you are cringing at it and feeling really uncomfortable in your seat. So I don't know that it's necessarily a mismatch. It's more that it's like to do it right, to actually get the scares in the right places and the laughs in the right places and have both be successful at the same time and balance that. I think that's just really hard to do. When it works so well.
Agreed.
And when it doesn't, it is the fucking worst.
Yeah, it is a tough thing to get down. It's like a fine line, but it depends too, I think, on the kind of horror you're doing. So the scares in this movie are more like the kind that make you squirm, and then you kind of laugh at yourself for it, just out of levity. So I think that's the kind of horror you need to be able to laugh at it. Obviously, I think it's harder to do horror comedy if you're doing like deep psychological horror, unless you like maybe throw in a joke here and there, again, just for a little bit of levity, but it would be a smaller element of the film. Like in this movie, it is so over the top conceptually and visually that it the absurdity is kind of a comedy in itself, but then also like the dialogue is really, really funny in this too. I think the characters like their reactions to the chaos around them is so on point, and I feel like this movie actually is more of a comedy than a horror film, if anything.
Nathan Fillion, he gives the best reactions. He gives the most like, what the fuck is going on? What the hell is this?
Yeah, he's so dry in his delivery about everything. He's just like, well, that was some fucked up shit. Like he's just like,
exactly.
He's great.
My favorite character in this movie was the mayor.
Yes.
And
oh yeah, he's great.
I like this actor, Greg Henry. He, first of all, we would see him and Michael Rooker in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, so I think it's cool that James Gunn liked to bring maybe some actors along with him, even if, for Greg Henry's in a smaller part. This guy I know mostly for just being like a jerk in previous things I've seen him in. Most notably, he was in Gilmore Girls as like the mean dad of Rory's boyfriend, which, appropriately enough, James Gunn's brother was on that show. So I didn't look into this, but in my imagination, maybe James Gunn visited the set to see his brother, met this actor, and it was history from there. So who knows?
I buy that. Yeah. And Keith, I know you said you didn't know Michael Rooker from anything before you saw this, but I knew Michael Rooker from Mallrats, where he plays like the evil dad, like he's like the chief villain, and I feel like there's so much of that same character in this character. Like, even though he's married to Elizabeth Banks in this film, there's always that creepy like vibe between him and his daughter in Mallrats, where you're like, does he like kind of want to fuck his daughter? What's going on here? And in this, because of the age difference, you're just like, oh, this feels like the culmination of that character, just taken to its extreme.
I should clarify. It's like relearning that he was in Mallrats. I should like the idea of character actors and people acting in movies 15 years ago did not click with me until like I got to college, because he was also, because my parents watched this movie, he was the antagonist in Days of Thunder, like against Tom Cruise. Like, he's been acting for a good long while, but he had
he's been around forever.
Yeah, and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, like he's astonishing, and it's amazing that Yondu is like a favorite character to some people in the MCU now because of James Gunn. But this is also what I appreciate about this film in hindsight, is that this is the introduction to James Gunn, his writing, his directing. This movie comes with style. Not every horror comedy movie comes with a voice, I would say. Not saying it's not bad, but it comes with a voice.
Sure.
It's definitely got his stamp on it, and that is something that made me want to maybe wish I had revisited this movie earlier, because I think this is the first time I've watched Slither since seeing Guardians of the Galaxy, And so going back to this movie now, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. If I went into this forgetting who the director was, I would have immediately recognized who it was, because it's got all his signature touches to it, and you can and just it's so funny to me that he makes this movie, and it doesn't really make any money, and then I think he made a movie with like Rainn Wilson.
Super. Have you guys seen?
I love
Super?
it. It's also what you
Super
expect
is
it to be.
Unrelentingly dark.
Yes,
like that is. I'm like afraid to rewatch that, because I'm just like, I remember watching it and being like, like I pursue this kind of work. I seek this out, and even I was just like, "Ooh, I don't know. This is like a little difficult for me to watch."
Okay, I have to give that one a watch then, out of curiosity.
I think I need to check it out again. But you're absolutely right. It's funny. I haven't seen this film probably since the early 2010s, and since then I've seen Guardians 2, and now The Suicide Squad. And he is really he's playing his greatest hits, I think, in some of those films.
Yes.
A lot of what you see in Slither ends up in those films in very literal ways. I mean, if you look at Guardians 2, where Ego tries to envelop like a small town in the Midwest with like the expansion of his physical form or whatever, that's exactly what Grant is doing in this. And then if you look at the final villain in the final sequence in the Suicide Squad, hive mind alien, and in fact some of the shots and even the plan they make to take it down, it feels, it's very, very similar. They're executed differently and both very, very effectively, but it's just so interesting to look back to this sort of forgotten horror comedy from 2006 and be like, oh yeah, there's the groundwork for the rest of his career.
Yeah, you're right, because conceptually, it's a similar idea of one mind kind of wanting to be everything. I think both characters, Ego and Grant, both say at one point, like, I will be everywhere, I will be everything. And
right.
I actually did recognize that watching the movie this time. And see, like, this movie doesn't really have, I would say, like, A-list stars. It has definitely recognizable actors that you usually see in supporting roles. So I kind of dig that too, that you're seeing these actors, Elizabeth Banks, Nathan Fillion, you're seeing these actors shine when normally they're like taking more of a back seat in a bunch of other projects, or at least for the longest time. I didn't even realize this was the same girl, Elizabeth Banks, as from like the Spider-Man franchise. J. Jonah Jameson's secretary, just because of that black wig, I guess. And it was another thing like Keith, where I didn't really look into, a lot of who these actors are and connecting their filmographies until college. Yeah. So for me, that was like a mind blown. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like the same person. And I think she's like really good in this. I think she's living in this world really well. I think she's really charming, and I kind of wish she was the lead in more things.
Oh, that's gross. Oh, come on. Oh. Come on. Grant. Come on. Wait.
What the fuck? God! Dog it!
It's interesting that you refer to her though as the lead, though, because I feel like this film, one of the things I found most interesting about it on this watch is that the protagonist seems to keep changing. The first 30 minutes of the film, it almost feels like Grant is the lead. He gets the most screen time. We spend the most time with him. We see the sort of loneliness that he's experiencing, and how that sort of makes him a perfect host for this, traveling alien that is, as we learn, is sort of alone in the universe, even though it is absorbing everything as it goes. It's not until he begins his transformation and it cuts to that 3 days later, then Nathan Fillion kind of becomes the lead, and Elizabeth Banks kind of is like the second lead along with him. But I just found that very interesting that we meet Nathan Fillion and Elizabeth Banks early on in the film, but they don't really take center stage until the second act of the film, really.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I did notice there was like a shift in like who the focus is on, but it seems like a lot of the story revolves around her characters. Maybe it's more of an ensemble film, maybe, then that's fair to say. Mm-hmm. But I think Elizabeth Banks' character, everything seems to be centered like around her, at least like this very like interesting relationship she has with her husband, especially as the film goes on.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, she has the biggest sort of change or arc, we can say, because, it's someone that we learn has sort of like fallen into this, marriage of convenience due to, the trauma of her past, and now she feels trapped in it. And it isn't until her husband, who is already kind of like monstrous and controlling, then sort of literally begins to physically embody his worst traits. Then she is able to finally sort of like free herself of him.
She perfectly encapsulates the B movie, like even her hair, a name like Starla. Like
Yeah.
I can't think of any of the actresses at the moment, but something that you would see in a grindhouse monster flick, like this Vivian Leigh, almost like a Gone with the Wind type in a B movie.
Well, even when they discover this alien thing, Grant and the Brenda character, that is right out of like a black and white film of, two people making out in the woods, and then, oh, what's this strange thing over here in the woods?
Right.
Let's get right close to it.
Yeah. Let's lean up right next to it and check it out.
Yeah, right.
It's funny, we having just rewatched all of the films in the Alien franchise. I've been paying, I'm very interested in paying attention to sort of the life cycles of alien creatures in sci-fi films, and the symbolism and metaphor that they carry. And I think there's a great amount of subtlety imbued into what Scott does in that first Alien film, and how it, speaks to themes of sort of like male rape and pregnancy and all of these things. And then you look at this film, and Gunn is like, yeah. But what if there was no subtlety?
True.
Yep.
I mean, I love it. It works extremely, extremely well. But it is not trying to be subtle in any way. It's very bombastic. It's all there on the surface. You go from the scene of Grant and Brenda in the woods, encountering the egg and the needle, and then you cut, forward to Grant impregnating Brenda. And instead of it being sort of this like subtle theme of like, wouldn't it be interesting if the male character experienced sexual assault and then a pregnancy, and we sort of play it out in this like very slow burn way, and eventually when everything starts to calm down, he explodes and an alien is born out of him? In this, it's just like, no, we're going to shoot this exactly like a very horny sex scene.
Yeah, well, you even have during that scene where the poor Brenda character is being impregnated, it's like the classic James Gunn thing of having like a soothing 70s hit play while there's just this scene of chaos going on. You get that later on in the movie, another classic touch.
Yeah, you get the needle drops here. He's showing you all his cards right away. There's this sort of like saying that you should treat every film like it's going to be the last one you get to make. And I love the idea that he is just putting all of his cards on the table in this film, and then the next one, and the next one, and then like every time he gets a chance at bat, he's just like, I'm gonna just throw everything at the wall because I may never get to do this again. And these are the 10 things I like, and you are gonna see all of them.
Yeah, I like that attitude a lot because right, you never know in that business, and too for him, I just like how. Yeah, I was saying before, he makes this movie, he makes Super, and neither one you could say is a financial success. But then after that, as a director, he gets Guardians of the Galaxy, and that winds up being like a huge hit. And sure, it maybe helps that he has like the Marvel name backing him up in that one. But I just kind of like the idea that he finally got to put his style out there in a way that resonated with audiences, and now that might give him a chance, audiences a chance to revisit maybe this movie. And then, if he breaks out into out of the superhero genre at whatever time he wants, we can get more movies like this.
It's worth noting that I think what helps him get Guardians of the Galaxy is the fact that his writing jobs are very successful. So he wrote Scooby-Doo, and he also wrote the Dawn of the Dead remake that Zack Snyder directed.
Right.
Both of those films are huge hits. So I think that is the kind of thing where it's like, it doesn't grant him like a blank check status or anything like that, but it keeps him in circulation in Hollywood for years and years, even when these films that he's directed aren't necessarily hitting with audiences. But it's also it's obvious when you look at these, Slither and Super, these aren't films geared at a general audience. These weren't going to be massive, humongous hits. They were only ever going to be sort of like breakouts within their genre. And even the success of Guardians, that isn't something where you can look at that on the surface and go, yeah, this is a surefire hit. You know, like it's clearly like a B property within the Marvel universe. Most people hadn't heard of it before he makes it. It's got a talking raccoon and a silent tree man. You know, it's like there's no way to guarantee that one's going to hit in the same way that you can sort of guarantee a film with Spider-Man in the title will.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I remember when they announced Guardians of the Galaxy and what that movie would entail. Everyone was kind of looking at each other like, "What are they doing now? A talking raccoon?" But then, like, here we are, all these years later, just where like so many people are fond of that franchise and really looking forward to the next one. So and then that's right. He did write. I looked into that. He did write those movies in the earlier 2000s, and it's interesting. He writes the Dawn of the Dead remake, which is, I think, both like a hit with critics and audiences.
Yeah.
Which is difficult because that's a remake of a very classic, beloved horror movie. But there was one critic's note, even though critics mostly like this, there was one critic note that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It was like Richard Roper said that he didn't like this movie because he was all zombied out at the time. And I'm like, okay, sure. There were a bunch of zombie movies during these like early mid 2000s, right? I think 28 Days Later, Dawn of the Dead, Land of the Dead. But I wouldn't even say this is like a zombie movie per se. It's definitely more leaning into like the alien part of the genre, but with zombie like elements.
Well, it's kind of an all of the above, right? Because we've talked a little bit about the things that it's like paying homage to and the things that it's pastiching, and I think that let me see, I wrote it down here. It kind of goes from a like body horror film to a small town creature feature to an alien invasion film to a zombie movie. You know, like it goes through the cycles of all of them, and in that way, he's able to sort of pay tribute to all of these like filmmakers that he loves and have come before him. I think you brought this up earlier, JJ. I think you're right. This is why critics liked it, because they were like, I'm a very smart man who has seen all of these things that it's referencing, and I'm being tickled pink by being rewarded for my like repertoire of previous viewings. And so, you know, you've got within the first like 30 minutes, you have references to, you know, Evil Dead, even directly in the visual language. You've got that one shot, I think, in the first like minute where the camera is like zooming through the woods and it lands on the alien egg. Like that's right out of Evil Dead. You've got references to The Thing. You've got references to, Keith, you mentioned The Blob. You've got Body Snatchers in here. You've got Shivers. You've got Night of the Creeps. You've got Night of the Living Dead. You know, you've got all of them. I think because, you know, Brenda's definitely a reference to Night of the Living Dead. Mayor McCready is a reference to The Thing. There's tons more in here that I probably haven't even clocked. That I'm sure some horror kid listening to this is screaming in their chair, going, "You forgot this one! You forgot that one!"
Well, listen to everyone out there. That's what the internet is for. Someone has done that for us, so you can easily look that up. But yeah, I love that too. I definitely caught The Thing references even in the beginning when I feel the rock, the meteor, whatever this alien is coming in. You see coming towards Earth. You know, like The Thing opens with the same shot of a spaceship coming into Earth.
Yeah,
and I like both movies conceptually. Obviously, they have different tones, but conceptually, I like the connection between The Thing and Slither because both are dealing with an alien entity that is corrupting the human form in a very disturbing way. And that is something that really resonates with me, even though this movie is really funny a lot of times. When you see that Grant transformation, it is like really jarring. I think, first of all, from like a makeup and practical effects point of view, they do an amazing job making up this Grant character at the end when he's like the full tentacled monster. I mean, he looks awesome, even with like all these. I mean, that's another conceptually weird thing too, is all the zombies merging with him and becomes like this huge thing of flesh. I mean, that's like really freaky. But I'm glad they just go all the way out there with that.
Props to the makeup department and special effects on this. This thought did come to me a few days after I watched this to add to like the non-success of this movie. This movie came out in 2006. I think maybe it was like, if this movie came out when even when like Netflix was a thing, I think it would have been it would have found like a home in terms of not being a box office failure. I think it might have, if it came out in the 90s, it would have had the Tremors or the Evil. I know Evil Dead is 80, but it would have had like a Tremors success. I think some people would have seen it. It would have had that small theater build up, but it came out in that we didn't know what to do with, like, it wasn't going to the theaters, and it was too early for streaming, because there's been a bunch of, I always think Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, another very good horror comedy, found a home on, a lot of people, it found a home on Netflix. Also, one movie that The Wolf of Snow Hollow, if I'm saying that name right.
Oh, I love
that was the last
movie
movie I watched of, like, 2019. Another horror comedy, very well done, I think. And also, word of mouth also helps with all of this stuff, as it has with Slither. But I think Slither was a little too early and a little too late on some things, and that's just bad timing.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Keith. I think if the film was slightly less nasty in its sort of point of view, I don't mean in its like visual style or its effects. There's a degree of sort of like nastiness and like edginess that like James Gunn is definitely intentionally going for at this point in his career, which he has since sort of like pulled back on. I think if we pulled out some of that nastiness in the point of view and it came out today, I think it would be a huge hit. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that people are interested in watching these days.
I agree. The timing, the 2006 was maybe just like an awkward time for this movie to be released. And if you say it's released even earlier, even like say in early 2000s or late 90s, this could have been like a big like home rental hit that people would go out. And 2006 is when maybe people kind of start to stop doing that. And it was just, like you said, it's unfortunate that maybe this is like the one time that maybe the one window that it might not have been able to take off.
Yeah, I just see like people on film Twitter. Like I feel like this would be a big hit on film Twitter. I think this would be a big hit on Letterboxd, and I feel like that kind of like word of mouth would have gotten this thing out there had those platforms existed at the time.
Yeah, I would say that this movie definitely has its fan base of people who do go back to this, and maybe we can help spread the word a bit and get people back into it again, maybe like by word of mouth. Because I do really have fun with this. You can definitely tell that the cast was having fun with this. Even like the zombie extras when they're doing their zombie thing, the small minor characters. I think everyone is. You can tell the actors are totally into it, and I think that's another credit to James Gunn to like communicate his vision and his tone to his cast. When again, like this horror comedy mix is not the easiest thing to convey.
Why are you running from me, baby? I wasn't gonna hurt you. I love you, baby. I tried not to change. I get it. I'm too ugly for you now. Is that it?
You don't want to hurt me.
You betrayed me. I can't trust you no more. Huh? Yeah, I got a little surprise for you.
To go back to a point you said just a moment ago, Adam, I don't think he's pulling back on. I think after watching The Suicide Squad, he kind of is like, this is who I am. Like you, as you said before, these are the 10 things that I like. And it's either a win, lose, or draw situation. And unfortunately, looking at everything with The Suicide Squad, it's unfortunate. I really enjoy that movie, but it's considered kind of like Slither. It's kind of a box office failure in some ways. But it's such to me, that's a throwback to like the movie. I just watched the movie Sorcerer a while ago, and that's like a B movie war film that's mostly about the characters, but you still have the violence, the great score, the James Gunn's humor. And I don't think I really think it's kind of like a beer that not only a few, but either you like it or you don't. And I don't know why some audience members, I think some audience members are kind of like Yelp reviewers on Rotten Tomatoes, is I don't like Thai, but I'll go into this Thai restaurant and say I don't like Thai. Even though I don't like Thai, I didn't like the restaurant. I think some people just like watching movies and they like, I didn't like this. This was stupid, boring, silly, gross. And I'm like, well, I would say this. Watch the trailer. If you don't like it, don't watch it. But if it at any tickles your fancy, you will like this movie wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think in a previous episode we did with you, Adam, you made a good point about how, when audiences are the ones who don't like something, it kind of boils down to expectations. But I feel like this movie definitely made it clear what it was going to deliver you.
Yeah.
For example, I remember all the promotional material for this movie centered around the bathtub sequence.
Yes. the poster and the DVD cover is still the bathtub
Right.
sequence.
I think all the trailers covered that scene because, first of all, what could be more vulnerable than being in a bathtub with all these like giant red worms coming at your way?
Yeah.
And that was definitely maybe. I mean, I think that is a good scene to represent. I think maybe they focus on it a little too much, but you know, it's kind of like a stylized image in a way when you see all these different posters.
Yeah.
And I mean, that scene is like a very memorable scene and everything. So I think if you see that poster and you are for some reason not really liking that, but you go into the theater anyway, I can't imagine that being like a snare many audience members would fall into.
I agree. And also just to go back to what I was saying about Gunn sort of pulling back. I don't mean that he's pulling back on his style or anything like that. I just think that there is a sort of like desire to push the limits of certain sensibilities that we see in this film that we don't see in later films. And I would even argue that he kind of addresses that in the work in films like Guardian and Guardians 2, which are about Star-Lord kind of growing up and being less of an edgy shithead. And I'm not calling Gunn an edgy shithead. That's just how I think the character is presented in that film. But I believe that, you know, for someone that speaks so openly about his work, his past, you know, his history, you know, writing and working with trauma, and you know, the sort of things he used to put out onto the internet, and like what you see in this film, I think that those films are him directly addressing his own past and sort of saying like, hey,
Yes.
I'm growing up, and I'm not gonna push those sensibilities in that way anymore. I'm still James Gunn. I'm still gonna needle drop. I'm still gonna do this. I'm still gonna do that. But you're not gonna see me, you know, doing this exact kind of edgy
He even
humor.
looks like a more mature
do you think-
director when he was doing. He's gone gray.
Yeah.
He's gone gray.
He's gone
We
gray,
all
yeah,
grow up.
'cause,
But I think when you come out of trauma, edgy is a part of your like. I think that's just part of your personality when you come out of trauma. But I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Does this movie give you a sense of, this is a first time director's work? You know, do you get a sense of that, or
No, this is a fully formed director.
Yeah.
You know, like you watch this film and you're like, this person knows exactly what they're doing. They know exactly where that camera's supposed to be. They know exactly when that cue's supposed to come in. Every scene is lit exactly how it's supposed to be lit. It all feels very intentional. You know, there's moments where I was like, oh wow, this is like a surprisingly like brightly lit, you know, scene in this bedroom right here. And you know, Elizabeth Banks has like so much glow on her. I wasn't really expecting that in a horror film. And you realize that he's doing that because he wants to contrast that with how dramatic the lighting is going to get as the film goes on. You know, he's doing everything on purpose here.
Yeah, you know, for example, too, with the set, that house in the beginning is such like a pristine, perfect house.
Yes.
It's a beautiful house, and then obviously at the end, it becomes this like disgusting nest for this giant flesh alien. So yeah, that there's definitely a lot of setup in the beginning that pays off, and it's not in like a super obvious way, but just in a way of like, okay, this is someone who just is really good at just setting up the framework here, has put a lot of thought into the screenplay, and just has like a very clear map of where he's going to take us. So I appreciated that there was I mean, I love, you know, the cruel ironies, you know, things that come back in any kind of movie, but especially like in a horror movie, you get, especially when you've seen it before and then you watch it this time, you kind of see like, oh, okay, they're setting up for something that I didn't catch the first time.
in that like classroom scene at the beginning, which I feel like is right out of Halloween, where you've got the teacher sort of explaining the theme of the film to the students, and then the film begins. You've got that, and then you've also got the moment of Grant watching Animal Planet and learning, you know, like crocodiles have been here for millennia and they've survived all of this. They're relentless, and you know, they're just in their nature, and it's just like, yeah, you can see him. It's a very tight screenplay in that regard. He's just laying it all out for you, and all the beats hit exactly when any screenwriting book would tell you they are supposed to hit.
I love it when I don't know, like it has that, you know, as you said, that first time filmmaker. It doesn't, but it all, like, neither did The Witch or Hereditary or even Get Out, where it's just like, I'm so happy all these people doing like a feature film for the first time are making these high quality pictures.
Yeah, and all horror movies where that's the genre that I feel like a lot of times big studios take for granted how they think it's easy to make a horror movie. They usually get lower budgets, and these are I think it's a genre that has so much more potential than that, and these are all directors who go into this genre knowing that and doing a lot more interesting things than you normally see in that genre. So I think that's really great. Maybe there's something to say about horror being like that, for maybe a first time big budget director getting a chance, because usually there's like a lower risk, but then really showing their chops and what they can do with the storytelling there. So those are all really good examples of just not first time directors, but just really great staples now in the genre.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing with horror is that it is one of the few genres where if you make a film in the genre, people will come out for the genre. They're not necessarily coming out for the stars or the directors or anything like that. They're coming to see a horror film. So as far as like, a producer's risk, the return on investment is like almost guaranteed, which it never ever is in the film industry. This is actually why Blumhouse has been so successful as a production label, is because they essentially play they have a volume game, right? So they put out like 10, 12 films a year. They all have budgets of less than $10 million. As long as one of them is a hit, it will pay for the entire production slate.
And they don't give a crap about like audience or critics reviews. Like I think they did Fantasy Island, and that was made for like less than $10 million budget, and I think that first weekend it made $50 million. Like you get the horror, you get a big return on investment, and that allows them to do Blumhouse. Their staple is horror, and they do more quantity. But then you get movies like Whiplash and Get Out, which are also made for very low budgets.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Get Out was made for $5 million.
Right, and that's the thing. Low budget, 100% creative control for the director. So it ends up being a situation where if in the right hands, the film has the potential to be something incredibly special and unique. It's funny. I was pitching to an investor once, and I was trying to get them to finance a horror film. I had this whole pitch put together with all these like charts and numbers for like the ROI on horror movies, and they were like, this is a really good presentation. I totally see what you're doing. I think you're right. We could make some money here. At the end of the day, though, I just hate horror films, and I have no interest in financing them.
That's a
I
shame.
just realized that he missed the boat on the Blum. Like if I feel like. Because when I was doing research for this movie, only one production company was like, "We'll make it right away, and we'll give you full creative control." And because everyone was like, "No, we're not really that interested in this." He missed the He missed the.
Mm-hmm.
If he got in at that early Blumhouse stage, we'd be living in an entirely different universe right now. Not that there would be the biggest movie, but it would have had a different trajectory.
Yeah, totally could have been. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, who knows where else that would have taken James Gunn's career. I mean, maybe he wouldn't have done. Who knows if he would have still done Guardians of the Galaxy if he was making, different kinds of movies. I'm happy he did.
I now think that Guardians of the Galaxy 3, after this conversation, Adam, that Peter Quill is gonna get fired for an old joke he made, and then find his way back.
Guardians 3, the cancellation of Peter Quill.
I think that's where the ultimate arc ends for him. Because, I think it's nice to see James Gunn grow as a person. I always love that with filmmakers and writers especially, but it's nice to see a living arc through their work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I feel like there's still a good amount of, at least, I want to say, like, technical maturity or something to say with this first entry he has.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, for example, too, I like he gives himself a cameo towards the beginning of the movie. Very
the
Alfred Hitchcock
cameo. Yeah.
There's also a Lloyd Kaufman cameo. Lloyd Kaufman being the head of Troma Studios. He's in the police station for a moment.
Okay.
Always nice to see Lloyd in his movies.
I also like the small part from Jenna Fisher as,
of
course, the secretary. Yeah. Basically, like playing the southern version of Pam Beesly. She probably was on set for like 2 days.
Well, his ex-wife at the time. I don't know if you know.
That's right. I did read about that. Yeah. Well, they were exes
at the time.
I was going to say wife at the time. But that's another one where like, oh, I haven't really watched this movie since I got really into The Office. Like totally forgot she was in this for a hot second.
Jesus!
Why is she doing that?
The Thomas is moving.
Relax.
Oh my god, stop doing that shit! It hurts, bitch! Bill? Oh, little fuckers are tearing me apart!
It's another movie, because obviously we keep bringing up other movies to compare this one to. I also was getting homages to Cronenberg's The Fly.
Oh, yeah,
just
definitely.
from like the makeup transformation. First it's just little sores. And even because at first too, when he gets infected, Grant, he like feels more invigorated than anything else, right? And then eventually the monstrous half takes over. So I like that parallel there. Again, a totally different tone. Makes me kind of want to watch The Fly now. And
it
go
did
back
make me
that
want to
one.
watch The Fly like immediately, and The Thing. Those were the two where I was like, oh man, it's been a while since I watched either of those. I got to check them out again.
Right? I feel like all these movies, again, conceptually go together, even though this one tonally is like, the odd man out, maybe like the wild stepbrother or something who like, is making jokes while the other two are trying to be serious.
Adam, I got a question. All right, I got a question for the both of you, and I kind of have an answer, but I feel like we need. What is it about? What makes someone go from doing horror movies to then comic book movies? I'm kind of because, I mean, he's following in the footsteps of a Sam Raimi, but also you have David F. Sandberg, who got his start in horror and then has gone on to Shazam. I know maybe there's more, but I always think of those three as like that have gone, very B-movie horror to directing some
Big
adding
budget.
horror into their movies. Yeah,
I think in the case of at least Gunn and Raimi, you are talking about two filmmakers who grew up in a time where comic book stuff and horror stuff were both looked down upon in equal measure, and so you're looking at people who had what would have been fringe tastes at the time. It just so happens the world caught up with their fringe tastes. So I don't know that for them, horror and comic book films exist on a different level or different spectrum than they do to modern audiences. I think that, really they're getting their start in a space that allows them to get a start in a world that doesn't really make comic book films. They are also comic book nuts. Comic book films become a thing. They get to level up. They're leveling up into a world that perceives comic book films on the level up above, B movies and horror movies. I don't know as much about Sandberg, and I believe he's significantly younger. I think he's, well, not significantly, but I think Raimi is. I want to say Raimi is in his 60s, Gunn is in his 50s, and I think Sandberg is in his either late 30s or early 40s.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, now I maybe take for granted how mainstream comic book movies are, and you're right, that was maybe a genre that, like, critics maybe turned up their nose on, and now they're more on board with. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see where the years have taken us here, and again, like, these are directors. Also, I don't want to take for granted either, because again, like if you look at. Again, James Gunn's his first outing here with Slither, financial disappointment that usually does not spell well for a lot of directors, but he bounces back and he finally gets this big hit.
Yeah.
So,
also, I just want to say, I looked it up. Sandberg is 40 years old, Raimi is 61, Gunn is 55. So there's a spectrum of ages there. But actually,
generation basically,
I do know though actually that if I remember correctly from I think I read something on like nofilmschool.com. I believe Sandberg, like Sam Raimi making Evil Dead, saw horror as like, I can do that. It will be cool, and it will, like, if it goes well, it'll get me out there in some kind of way. I was actually just reading Bruce Campbell's biography. And I also just actually saw Evil Dead again in theaters for the 40th anniversary. So it's all kind of like fresh on my
40
mind.
years.
40
Damn.
years. Yeah, it's crazy. It's all kind of fresh on my mind. And so again, the Evil Dead was obviously they wanted to make it. They were into that kind of thing, but it was also a calculated move. They were also like, horror films seem to be a thing that like play well with a certain kind of audience, and like we believe if we do a horror film, we'll be able to sort of make the money back on the production. So again, sort of going back to that ROI on just genre as the star, it is a calculated bet, and it's a good bet.
Yeah, one that we always enjoy. I think we're all fans of that genre. We go out for the genre. I mean, we also like to go out for now. At least we're seeing more directors attached to these titles. So, like for example, people will go out for a horror movie, but then you might see maybe even more people go out for a Jordan Peele horror movie. You know what I mean? I think the name behind the horror movies are starting to have an even bigger meaning than they had previously.
You like their work. You like the voice. You like them. You like their writing. You like their style. Like Jordan Peele is kind of. I always think about where Jordan Peele has gone with horror, and I think it's evident that he's gone into a Twilight Zone. He's making like long form socio commentary Twilight movies in the best of ways.
He refers to them as social thrillers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that, but.
But he also did. He was behind.
He also is the host of the Twilight Zone. Yeah.
Right, the Twilight Zone on.
And that was like evidence. Like, hey, I'm like, okay, he grew up on the Twilight Zone. That he like watching us. I'm like, I feel like I'm getting this just like giant Twilight Zone message.
Yeah,
like there's other elements
a specific
too.
Twilight Zone episode as the sort of reference point for us. I think, and he also, I remember an article I read with him or an interview or something where he was saying that in regards to sort of how he managed to show up so fully formed, he was like, well, if you look at Key and Peele, we did, all these, pre-taped sketches, and so many of them the joke came from playing in a genre space and playing that genre kind of straight, but then adding a layer of absurdity to it. And so in that sense, it's sort of like a film school experience for him where he is making, 100 short films in a year that all have, this kind of genre and that kind of genre. And as the show goes on, there's a lot of horror stuff.
The Forrest Whitaker sketch. I think that's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, there's plenty of horror in there. So he's well versed in how to do all of that by the time he gets the opportunity to direct his first film.
Well, to me, that all goes back to how horror movies also have such great potential for being a statement about something. Obviously, Jordan Peele's movies are a great example of that. But you could even make a case for this movie, Slither, where we alluded to this before, where Grant becomes this like monstrous person, and this is kind of like a manifestation of this like pent up energy in this marriage of convenience, right? Like
yeah.
Right, even in a movie as as comedic and bombastic as this one, you could still find like the metaphor behind like the monster or the, whatever you're going for.
Yeah.
So I look for that in horror movies, even if maybe it's not intentional there. I feel like there's fears are rooted in a lot more deeper things, and so even if a movie's just trying to do like a basic slasher or something, there can be some subtext to be found, even if it's not intentional.
Yeah. I mean, also just because you're talking about Grant again, first of all, absolutely fucking hilarious that his name is Grant.
Yeah, I love
it. Like, truly incredible. But also, I love the scene that after Grant has been infected with the alien, and he comes into the house, and Elizabeth Banks is there, and tries to sort of reignite the intimate side of their relationship, and he starts crying, and it's this bizarrely tender thing that ends up sort of becoming a driving point throughout the rest of the film, where you realize that, I love the sort of thing that Gunn is playing with. Like, he's exploring the psychology of the thing, of the blob, a creature that absorbs everything in its path and assimilates everything, and in assimilating everything, creates this hive mind where it is all people, it is all of these things, and yet is extremely lonely because in actuality what it's doing is just moving from place to place, consuming without making any actual connection beyond the physical connection of absorbing things. I love the way that monster seems so fucking sad.
Yeah, especially at the end.
It's such an interesting take on that. You know, you don't watch The Thing and feel sympathy for The Thing, but there's a part of you that feels sympathy for this thing, even though it is absolutely repulsive and horrible,
right.
because as it says, and as we learn thematically up front, it's just following its nature.
Yeah, they definitely emphasize that.
Is this the first movie, and I don't say the Borg, but is this the first movie where we do get some, like, who knows, the thing could be like a scared creature that's just trying to survive. Is this the first time the hive mind is a character?
Or there's any sort of sympathy or empathy
and
for a hive mind?
And that's just me, maybe. I know Night of the Creeps was heavily referenced. I just never seen it, but it definitely came up in my research. But I'm trying to think of,
I can't remember.
At least, you know, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, they have... I don't think they have, like, character. They have motivation. Or they have, like, their job. But I don't think... At the World's End, that's later on. That's
right.
Actually,
yeah,
that's interesting.
Even then, there isn't really a second. Yeah, but there isn't, even in World's End, there isn't really. There's nothing beyond the mission-driven mind of that hive mind. It's just like, we're here to assimilate you because you guys can't fucking handle yourselves. You know.
Wow, that puts Slither in a different category for me. That just got some points. I never even thought about that.
I'm sure it isn't. I'm sure it isn't the first. I'm sure there's stuff that like we are missing, but I do think it stands out as a result either way.
Okay, yeah, I'll take you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say it's the first, and if someone wants to come at me, bring it on. I will take that responsibility. Oh, I think there's empathy for this creature, which again brings me back to The Fly, because there's a lot of empathy for the Jeff Goldblum fly monster, even after he's transformed completely at the end. So again, that's like a credit to both directors, that you feel sorry for this absolutely disgusting, hideous thing that you want to like not really look at for too long. I like I like thinking about this. Any sort of horror concept, I like to think out. I like that for James Gunn, he just put a lot of thought into how this creature like takes over worlds and what its whole system is, how it breeds, how it infects people in different ways. Again, just putting thought into it, and I think it's pretty tight. Obviously, you can like poke holes in it, and it's pretty ridiculous. That's like where the levity of the character's commentary comes in. But I just like that. I think about it, I'm like, okay, this all kind of checks out. That's the potential when you have an alien invasion movie, is that it could be whatever you want, really. You can have them incorporate elements of being zombies or these like disgusting worm things, or like have this character, this poor Brenda character, turn into a giant flesh balloon and explode. That's probably one of the worst things I've seen.
That I think is for me, that's the most horrifying image in the film.
Oh yeah,
it's so hard to watch. Yeah,
I feel like it's one of the worst things I've seen to any character in any movie.
Why did you do this to her?
top 20 maybe like horrible like movie deaths is this character. And again, like the fact that they built this giant ball and painted it into this flesh color and stuck this actress's head through. I mean, that's like all awesome. I'm sure they had fun making that and stuff like that. But again, like I can see why that would turn off certain audience members, because it's just so bizarre and weird. That, or the fact that these like, you see these worm things kill like small children.
That's true. See, that's some of the sort of like edginess and nastiness that I'm referring to, where I'm like, I don't think modern day Gunn is going to be killing kids on screen.
No. I mean, you don't see like too much of it. You just see them kind of like squirm around a little bit after the fact, but still, like, this poor teenage girl sees her whole family get like murdered by like disgusting like, I don't know, slugs.
And then they rise from the dead to come after her. Like, it's like classic zombie film stuff where you are faced, your enemy has the face of your loved ones. And like, even if you feel sympathy for them, you're only hurting yourself by trying to save them.
Yeah, exactly. It's I definitely got that homage that he was playing in that scene where she's like in the car and they're all like surrounding her like, come on, it's us.
I read that the producers were like, you could do this, but can you not show the kids getting like killed?
It's like, fine,
it's like,
we'll just
that
have
makes sense.
Yeah, I get it.
That, or the fact that also like Grant is got a whole cellar full of dead cats and dogs.
Oh yeah, that was horrifying.
You know, like there's just a lot of things. I don't know, audiences like to see children or dogs get murdered. Those are usually two no-nos, but I don't know.
Those are rules. You know, that's what they tell you. They're like,
Spielberg
don't kill a dog, don't kill
Cows
kids.
are okay.
Spielberg got away with that in Jaws, and I think that's probably the only time that anyone's gone away with that.
But in Jaws, it is played for an emotional thing because we have
Right.
the mother of the child come back afterwards and slap the chief. You know.
No, that's totally true. It's not played for jokes or anything. That's like a more serious, dramatic movie. But
Yeah.
again, like a risky move either way,
Yeah.
because you risk turning off your audience, especially in the first 15 minutes.
'Cause you and I, we could be together. I never had much use for this world anyway. I can stay with you while you do what you need to do. 'Cause it's your nature. And I see that now. I'm here for you.
Okay, so I think we can give our final thoughts now on Slither. So Adam, if you want to start us off here on what your assessment would be, your final score would be on Slither.
Yeah. Yes. What is my? We do out of 100?
Yeah,
I can't remember. Yeah.
That's the rules.
That's the rules. Yeah, I think it's important to grade a film sort of on like not what you want it to be, but what it is trying to be. And I think in terms of what this film is attempting to be, it's like fully, and completely successful. I think for that reason I have to give it, probably like an A grade. I think I got to give it somewhere in the 90 to 95 range. I don't know, what do you call that? A 93?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's go with that.
Cool.
Oh, what about you, Keith?
Well, Adam, this is your third time on this show, and I think we could talk about movies with you for days. Like just but I always appreciate talking to you
because I love
because
to talk about movies with you guys.
I always talk about one thing I get out of talking about King Kong is the movies always go 2 points, a couple points above just like dissecting this movie, and it's the same thing that happened here. I think that Slither, it's not for everyone, but don't see if you see the trailer, watch the trailer. If it's not for you, do not watch it. But if this at all tickles your fancy, I think this it's good for Halloween. It goes in the monster movie. Like if you wanted to do like a marathon of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Evil Dead, Tremors, Tucker, like Slither has more than earned its place, maybe in the top 5. I'm gonna give it a solid 85.
Right on.
Nice.
I think he has gotten better as a filmmaker.
Oh, okay.
But it's 85 is a pretty good first off the bat for me.
Yeah, I'm going to give this one a 90. I think that it's just a really fun time, that it is doing everything it wants to do very successfully, and I just really appreciate how, again, I feel like affectionate is a word that comes to mind, which is, again, kind of bizarre considering how gross this movie can be, but not just for the old B movies that it's referencing, but just like everyone's having fun with this movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's infectious, appropriately enough. And so, you know what I mean? I really just enjoy myself watching this. And so I'd recommend it to, I think everyone we know would enjoy this movie. Again, it's not for everyone, but definitely at least giving it a shot, because you never know. And also maybe oddly nostalgic for the mid-2000s, which is not typically a time that I think too much about, but I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny, it has a very sort of mid-2000s look to it. It's got this sort of like high contrast cinematography with this like green tint to it. And I'm just like, yeah, you're making a horror film in the mid-2000s, slap that green on there,
Get us in the mood there.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, the little touches there that bring you back to that era. But okay, Keith, what is our average score?
It doesn't happen often, but we are higher than the critics. 89.
I'm all about it.
Wow, look at that.
I do
We're
think
certified fresh in this baby.
That's yeah. So it's official on Slither. We are siding with the critics, and so they got it. But I would even say it's even better than they say it is. So
Yes.
thank you, Adam, for joining us
thanks,
again.
man.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always such a good time to come on the show and chat about the movies with you.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. And then for anyone out there who listens to us, make sure you also check out Adam's podcast, Adam and Dom's Eye the Duck podcast.
Yes, Eye of the Duck. We drop every Monday on all of your podcast platforms. We just wrapped up a mini-series on all of the films of the Alien franchise, Xenomorph Summer. So if you liked listening to me jabber on about aliens and parasites and all that gross stuff, you should check that out. And if you like crime films, we're currently in the middle of a new mini-series on films of the true crime genre.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I love your podcast with Dom. My favorite of that Xenomorph Summer was the Spaceballs episode, because that's a childhood favorite of mine, and I was so happy.
Our bonus. Yeah, Spaceballs with Griffin Newman from Blank Check. Definitely check that one out.
Yeah, that was hilarious. So yeah, thanks guys for listening to our podcasts and our discussions on movies, and look out for more. All right, see you guys. Bye.